Those are the screams of a 17-year-old girl, a troubled youngster crying for help.
They're asking you, how does it feel?
This is called confrontation therapy. It comes in various forms. It is supposed to help troubled children.
And you're running your lives and standing up there trying to make people feel sorry for you and running a game at a time, and you better start answering questions and being honest.
Today, they are the raw material of a growing industry, an industry that treats troubled kids. That word troubled is a relatively new label for kids like these. It used to be that we had bad kids who were locked away in reform schools and sick kids who were locked away in mental hospitals. But in the past decade, we've been seeking an alternative. Instead of simply punishing unacceptable behavior, we've been looking for ways to change that behavior. This facility, called Elan, claims to be able to do that. Elan is a leader in an expanding coast-to-coast industry, parts of which we'll look at tonight. Elan's defenders claim it has the most consistently effective program for salvaging young people who are too difficult for other facilities to handle. Joe, you make no bones about it. There is corporal punishment here at Elan. Tell us about it. What are the stages it comes in? Who's it administered by?
Well, it's administered by the kids, first of all. And corporal, it's a harsh term. Okay, what it is we have the ring, okay, which everybody misinterprets. It's not a boxing ring, it's a ring of human people.
Youngsters who are accused of being bullies are forced to fight continuously against a series of opponents until they are beaten.
The right kind of kid is someone who is of average or more intelligence. Some of our kids are very bright. Who can make cause and effect connections, who may be on medication but probably does not truly need it. We determine that on a case-by-case basis, on an individual basis. But it's essentially someone who has been making bad choices, who may have been involved in the psychiatric system, but doesn't seem really severely disturbed. Although some of our kids have that, some of our kids do have that label attached to them.
You know, when kids come into my office for admission and I'm processing their paperwork, I look at them and their eyes are so empty and so blank. They are so out of touch with who they are and what they are capable of accomplishing. When I go to graduations and I see students, and I usually try to chat with them for a few minutes before we go through their actual ceremony, their eyes are there, that brightness is there, they're back.
Colonel Dickey's patrol in force has accomplished its mission: search and destroy.
My name is Hugh Romney. I'm with a hog farm, and I'm working on a scene. Some people call it bum trips. I don't think there's such a thing as a bum trip. We're working with hobo voyages. A half an hour after we release anybody from our section, we turn them into doctors, and they care for people that were tripping like they were when they came in. Now, people have been saying that some of the acid is poison. It's not poison. It's just bad acid. It's manufactured poorly. So anybody that thinks they've taken some poison, forget it. And if you feel like experimenting, only take half a tab.
Join me here. Won't you be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen? Come on, Dr. Jaffe. Mr. Crow. Mr. Early. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with the bipartisan leaders, which began at 8 o'clock and was completed 2 hours later. I began the meeting by making this statement, which I think needs to be made to the nation. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. I have asked the Congress to provide the legislative authority and the funds to fuel this kind of an offensive. This will be a worldwide offensive dealing with the problems of sources of supply as well as Americans who may be stationed abroad wherever they are in the world. It will be government-wide, pulling together the 9 different fragmented areas within the government in which this problem is now being handled. And it will be nationwide in terms of a new educational program that we trust will result from the discussions that we have had.
The Vietnam War was a turning point in American culture and society. The public was split on involvement, and a bold and distinct line was drawn in the sand. On one side, the traditionalists, with visions of the way things used to be, a questionless society weaned on communally strict order, and on the other, paisley and technicolor supertramps fueled with grapefruits and psychedelics. Psychonauts, questing for a better life, stretching long-standing liberties, and for the first time in a long time, wielding the Constitution for progress, and the government was scared. Make peace, not war was a very real revolution, although it probably got a little out of focus as the years went by. And post-war, the open market of new and designer drugs was a very near unstoppable force that found permanent position among everyday society. First on street corners and then directly into the homes of the masses, good people were suddenly doing bad things, and it was clear that the golden years had come to an abrupt end. Drugs were suddenly available in abundance, and police infrastructure nationwide wasn't ready for it. Society wasn't ready for it, and the safe, habitual lives of traditional American homesteads were turned upside down. And as the masses reluctantly lurched forward, the government struggled to regain control, and the war on drugs was officially announced. Federal funding was allocated in the millions to support the legislation. Stronger police, stricter laws and punishments, multiple drug awareness campaigns, prevention and rehabilitation on all levels, from research to development, were instantly approved, however wild the initiatives. In retrospect, this move by government might have had its own agenda, a feint within a feint, although the overarching effect would be long-lasting and with positive results, and federal budgets for substance recovery grew to almost limitless levels.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
Hi, I'm Joseph Ritchie, Democratic candidate for governor. During the past few months, I've been talking with people from Portland to Presque Isle, Democrats who are disillusioned with the practices of their party in Augusta. Many can't understand why the principles of their party have been compromised. They want to see a real Democrat in the Blaine House, someone representing working people, not just big business. That's why I'm a Democrat, determined that the party of the working people works for you.
Joseph J. Ritchie, a very independent Democrat, fighting for the people.
Joseph Ritchie was born on August 29, 1946, into a working-class, first-generation Italian-American family in Port Chester, New York. Before Joe was even born, his father ran away, abandoning his family mid-pregnancy. His mother just couldn't raise Joe on her own, and she would quickly sign away custody, leaving Joe to be raised with his grandparents. Despite his tough beginnings, as a child, Joe was a charming and intelligent young boy. Always outwardly calm and cool-headed, he was a born leader, and the neighborhood kids gravitated naturally towards him. Joe was the cool kid on the block, and he knew it. As he grew into his middling years, however, his innocent charm would fade away and a more rebellious teen would take its place. Joe would skip school often, and when he did go, it was mostly to pick on and bully younger kids. Instead, he would spend his days vandalizing, vagranting, doing dine-and dashes, breaking into cars, and drinking. In 1962, when Richie was 15, he would be seriously injured in a car accident. His recovery was long and tough. He spent months in the hospital and even longer in physical therapy. To help deal with the pain, he was fed a continual myriad of painkillers, something he quickly became dependent on. And when the prescription stopped, the replacement started, and soon, Joe found himself addicted to heroin. Non-functioning, Joe did not have the money to support this addiction, and as the page turns, he fell deeper into a criminal mindset. Petty crime and shoplifting eventually turned to armed robberies and holdups. He would be caught more than once, even spending some time in juvenile prison, but it wasn't until 1967, when Joe was facing federal charges on the robbery of a mail truck, that Joe decided it was time for change. And with Joe's current addictions in mind, the court gave him a choice. He could spend 7 years in prison, or attend a new program that focused on sobriety and rehabilitation from substance abuse. To avoid a permanent record in jail time without knowing what he was agreeing to, Joe chose the latter, and was sent to Daytop Village, a tough-love rehabilitation center with direct links to a controversial substance abuse program called Synanon.
We have trucks and land and buildings, and we got to get food and so on.
He's 52 years old. He's deaf in one ear. He's an egomaniac, but one of the wisest persons that I've ever met in my life. He knows how to get people moving.
Founded by Charles Dietrich in the 1950s, Synanon was a pioneering multi-addiction rehabilitation center that would come to fame for its unique methods of therapy, notably an aggressive, no-holds-barred sharing circle that was known simply as the game.
You can say nothing! Take it easy! How do I like I didn't break the window! I didn't have to say, Tony, please take it easy!
In the game, participants would take turns verbally attacking each other, calling out one another's weaknesses without all the sugar-coating. This method, however controversial, had at least some psychological merit, and many behavioral modification research doctors, initially at least, praised the game as a breakthrough. Daniel Casriel, a practicing psychoanalytic doctor in New York, was so impressed with Synanon's methods that he himself signed up and stayed at one of Synanon's recovery homes for a number of months, studying the process and the effects it had on its participants. He would go on to write a number of books about Synanon and its unique attack therapy. However, while he saw psychological merit in the program, his interviews with recovered Synanon alumni suggested that while outwardly happy and active contributing members of society, internally their issues continued. The trauma was simply masked. He approached Charles about his finding, recommending a series of mandatory treatment follow-ups, catered to the individual, where they would be given the tools to permanently overcome their demons, instead of just ignoring them. Charles disagreed, and would ultimately steer Synanon away from a goal of recovery and into a full-blown cult. While Casriel would join forces with two other investors, a Roman Catholic priest and a former Synanon vice president, together founding Daytop Village, opening the doors of its first center in 1963 in Staten Island. Daytop, an acronym for Drug Addicts Yield to Probation, could loosely be described as a more refined and clinically supported version of Synanon's early methods, which would prove to be a successful formula. Synanon's game was modified to include the recommendations Casriel had made to Dietrich. Now, post-treatment sessions with psychological professionals are mandatory. Rather than a soul-breaking gauntlet of abuse, Daytop hoped to empower its residents through a professionally supported, peer-based accountability system. And it worked. Daytop would eventually become both the longest-standing and most successful rehabilitation center worldwide.
I think my previous goal was getting a patient from sick to well, but that's no longer my goal. I find that most of the people that come to me are not sick, they're malprogrammed, they're maladapted, they're unhappy. And I've changed my goal from sick to well, to unhappy to happy. Now, I found out that most of my psychotherapeutic endeavor is not getting a person from sick to well. That's easy. The hard part is getting a person from well to happy. Everybody feels entitled to take their hand away from a burning stove if it pains them. Nobody has any problems about trying to remove pain. But it's amazing the conflicts and the distortions that people have when you say, reach out for happiness. You know, don't settle for a lack of pleasure. Don't settle for just being well. You should be able to feel a sense of well-being and a joie de vivre about yourself. Not all the time, but the capacity to feel it when it's appropriate, to really feel good about life. And that's a different state than just well. That's a state of well-being and happy. And people have a lot of problems about reaching out for pleasure. They don't trust it. It's hedonistic, it's immoral, it's unethical, it's, you know, what do you mean happy? Like, I'll settle for God shouldn't strike me down and I should be well. Well, that's not enough. That's not enough as far as I'm concerned. But I agree with Dr. Spotnik, you can't tell every patient to what is enough. What I have is not so much a medical process, but an educational process. And like every educational process, some people say, well, I graduate from grammar school, that's well and that's enough. Some people want high school, some people want to go a higher step to college or graduate school. Amazingly, the people that come to me who have higher educational levels stay the longest. Not that they're the sickest, but they have a higher capacity and they want a greater amount of pleasure out of life.
For a personality like Joe's, bold, independent, and perhaps more than just a little narcissistic, Daytop was exactly the wake-up call he needed. Stripped of excuses, Joe had no choice except to face himself, and by the time his treatment was complete, he would leave Daytop a changed man, sober and laser-focused. Daytop had proven that its system worked and had an atypically low relapse rate. Recovery here meant empowered abstinence, and Joe embraced that path. Once on the outside, he wasted no time in opening his own recovery clinic in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1969, naming it Survival Incorporated. And it was successful, utilizing aspects of therapies Joe underwent while at Daytop. Survival Incorporated was the budget-friendly version, cobbled together and in a far less inspiring setting. The treatment model was the draw, and Joe would make a small fortune while Survival Incorporated was open. Business-savvy and long-term focused, Joe quickly diversified his investments, building a small empire around his growing interests, including the purchase of Scarborough Downs Racetrack. The track at the time of purchase was in sad disrepair, but Joe saw a future vision and built the Downs to be one of New England's most prominent tracks. Gambling at the time was a booming industry, with many establishments backed or owned directly by mob interests. There was a certain stigma attached to gaming establishments that carried with it dangerous implications, and it would have been safe to argue that most, if not all casinos and number tracks, were involved with the mob in some capacity, if even just simple oversight. And Scarborough Downs was no different. And, coupled with Joe's bold and abrupt sense of business, the Downs quickly caught the attention of the FBI. After a long and semi-public investigation into Joe and the Downs itself, the government publicly announced that Joe was involved with the Boston mob. Joe's assets were seized and bank accounts frozen. He would take immediate action against the bank and government itself, suing for defamation, claiming that the allegations, however plausible, were simply not true and damaged the perspective the public had on the establishment. He would win, and walked away with a settlement of over $15 million. From the dredges and with perpetual controversy, Joe's story was truly one of rags to riches, and by the time he was 30, he was a self-made millionaire. Flush, Joe was becoming a member of the elite 1%, and he would use this momentum to pursue a career in politics. His silver tongue and keen financial prowess brought him many opportunities that he would eventually fumble, even running for governor twice, although he was never really a contender and failed to secure a seat anywhere, even with town council. In 1970, Joe would cross paths with Gerald Davidson, a child psychiatrist who worked for Massachusetts General Hospital and as a lecturer at Harvard, specializing in behavior modification programs, with a focus on drug and alcohol abuse and the predilection for criminal activity in children and teens. Joe and Gerald were an unlikely couple, born on opposite sides of the fence, but Davidson's research into teenage addiction and Joe's practical experience as a recovered addict and successful businessman brought them together.
The position paper that I gave as a presidential address in 1974 as outgoing president of what was then the Association for Advancement of Behavior Therapy, now it's renamed Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies, which is a great renaming of an organization. And as some of the viewers might know, I argued in that address of mine that the therapy process and the assessment process are impossible to think about without embedding them in a world of values and biases and prejudices of those human beings we call clinicians, as well as society at large. And I found myself, much to my surprise, I must say, coming to the conclusion that we should stop offering change of orientation programs because it was not consistent with the politics and values that I felt were proper to pursue.
They would talk at great lengths about this unifying connection. What if they could create a method to intervene with problem kids? There was a very clear gap in treatment that focused almost solely on adult rehabilitation. What if they could prevent all the adult year struggle before it was too late, before it even began? What if Joe and Gerald could develop a program that would teach teenagers how to cope in life? And what if they could get rich doing it?
I'm Joseph Ritchie, Democratic candidate for governor. I'm not a professional politician. I'm a businessman who sees a great deal wrong in our state. I'm concerned that big business special interests are eroding our economy and destroying our environment, and we must stop ignoring the needs of working men and women. I'd like to help bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, the North and the South, and I know I can. That's why I'm a Democrat, determined that the party of the working people works for you.
Joseph J. Ritchie, Democratic candidate for governor.
Sebago is a small and beautiful little hamlet in Cumberland County, Maine. It's an ideal little town, self-sufficient with abundant resources. Fertile soil, rich forests, and nearby Sebago Lake make this tucked-away town a true paradise. Sebago is over 200 years old and has changed hands many times over the years, with the opening of a canal connecting Sebago Lake to Portland bringing the town its biggest boom. although it never expanded much more than a few farms and couple houses, and that's exactly the way the locals liked it. Summer would bring in a few tourists, enough for a little extra, but in general, Sebago was left largely alone, a tranquil piece of paradise that seemed caught in time. It's here, in 1974, in this sleepy little hollow, that Joseph Ritchie, Gerald Davidson, and David Goldberg, a silent investor, would purchase an abandoned high school, the Potter Academy, and set up what they had hoped would be their first permanent home, having already broken ground 4 years prior in Naples, where Joe and Gerald had worked on developing their program on a much smaller scale. Elan is a French word meaning energy, style, and enthusiasm, and the school was marketed to the public as a tough-love boarding school for hard-to-handle teens, a place where children would be forced to face their demons in uniquely effective ways, learning how to navigate the unforgiving roadways of life, all while reaping the benefits of a high-tier boarding school that would act as a gateway to premier colleges and universities. To quote Elan directly, Elan's purpose is not to change an ill-behaved child into a well-behaved child, but rather to return home a responsible young adult. Quickly, Elan would gain national support from notable education institutions and would lobby for and win a last-chance contract for troubled teens from the American court system. Elan aimed to act as an alternative to an official criminal record. And right from its humble openings in Naples, the school and accompanying program was wrought with in-the-open controversy. Many of the first-round attendants were denizens of the court, there by mandate as a last resort. Others were the forgotten, teens with no dire need for reform, simply dropped off and never spoken to again. And the rest, a gross minority, were teens whose parents bought the dream of a tough-love boarding school. Sebago locals were immediately up in arms over the school's opening and their quiet little piece of heaven, and residents feared that Elan is what the town would become known for, the dumping ground for throwaway teens, although there was little they could do other than complain. Joe and Gerald gave little attention to the controversy. The program was in its pioneer years and they were essentially learning as they went, and growing pains were expected, both inside the school and with public perception. Financially, it was an overwhelming success, and the program would constantly adapt with more extreme methods at the ready. Restriction became routine, and the outside world was methodically removed from the residents. Focus for Joe was on the fit and finish of the school, how it looked to those on the outside, with little regard for those within. The Elan residents, wild and defiant teens, would revolt often. To the students, this was no school, it was a prison, and Elan's staff and doctrine would evolve and adjust in kind, with equal ferocity to that of the kids. Many of Elan's pioneer residents attempted escape so often it became almost routine. However, they would never get far before being caught and brought back to the school, but a few lucky escapees were able to reach the authorities first and made serious allegations of abuse. These claims went largely dismissed, although were enough to have at least 11 students pulled from the program as a result. Shortly thereafter, the Elan residents had reached their peak and planned their ultimate escape, setting a fire in the attic that quickly spread, burning the entire campus to the ground in a matter of hours. The students thought they had won. Joe was the type of person who always had his eyes on the rung of the ladder just above him, and because of this, had many real estate expansion plans already in place. The destruction of Sebago simply expedited that roadmap, and 3 separate campuses were purchased in quick succession. Elan 2, the old Pinehenge Academy, was purchased in nearby Waterford, which would act as a kind of refuge for Elan 1 students who were stranded by the fire. The academy was fitted with multi-lock doors and had bars on all the windows. It was a maximum security facility where the majority of the residents were simply the hardest of all teens, the remainder being temporary residents from other schools, either as an overflow or punishment. Elan 4 was not far behind, an overwhelmingly institutional building that also served as a halfway home in Parsonsfield that housed the high-threat, last-chance teens, awaiting trial for the most serious of criminal charges. Elan 3, an abandoned hunting lodge situated on 32 sprawling acres in Poland, Maine, would act as the school's headquarters and eventual flagship location, and would also garner the most attention, both good and bad. Poland is a small northeastern community flanked by rolling hills and pristine lakes and rivers in Androscoggin County. A small community that has hovered right around 5,000 people for the last 30 years. It features large, sprawling, forest-wrapped acreages and endless community-maintained trails, alongside national treasures like the Range Pond State Park. Poland saw limited growth over the years. Despite the abundant springs and waterways and rich agricultural potential, the town plateaued long ago and has remained a sleepy, picturesque hamlet ever since. Despite the negative connotations of being directly involved with the most desperate, Elan and its tough love mentality also caught the attention of the well-to-do and hopeful, parents who thought the school would be good for their child, an alternative learning institution that could cultivate the best of their kin, to build strong character and confidence, a watered-down varsity gateway boot camp, where policies rule without all the militant expectations, replaced with horseback riding, skiing, and nature hikes, instead of parade marching, pull-ups, and 10-kilometer runs uphill. And that is exactly the vision Elan wanted to portray, something they never directly marketed but would never contradict, however false the vision may have been. The program was marketed as complete, with Elan claiming that the average length of stay was between 18 to 22 months, very rarely being less than 14 months or longer than 2 years. The truth is, less than 10% of residents graduate, and out of those graduates, less than 10% of those complete the program within 24 months. Adjusted for today's economy, parents would pay the equivalent of $70,000 a year to have their child attend Elan, the school as a whole making an adjusted income of roughly $10 million a year. An early and widely distributed brochure from Elan attempts to prepare parents for what their child is about to endure, and strongly recommends that parents visit the facility before enrollment so they can see firsthand what their child is in for. More of a disclaimer than anything, it's safe to assume that most parents, if any, failed to make the trip to Elan beforehand. Upon enrollment, parents are instructed that they are to give full release of their child to Elan, and that it's especially important that they stay vigilant during the school year. They are expected to understand that contact will be limited. Phone calls were not guaranteed and restricted to once a week, if granted at all. All letters both in and out would be reviewed and possibly withheld without notice, and visits were strictly prohibited until the faculty had determined the child was capable of, and I quote, negotiating and interacting with his or her parents in a way appropriate to an adolescent, rather than a petulant child. In place of regular contact with their child, parents instead would receive quarterly reports on progress, although even that was not guaranteed. The report, written by a counselor, aimed to be a candid summary of the student's attitudes and issues, giving special attention to specific infractions. Elan warns not to be alarmed with the often initially bleak reports, that depression in their child under these circumstances is expected and necessary. It's Elan's thinking that depression is useful as a tool to demonstrate to the resident how, right up until that point, they have wasted their life away. Elan's goal was to strip away all the guilt triggers, the things that inspire all the negative actions, total elimination of the avenues of pleasure. Drugs, alcohol, and sexual misconduct were all banned. In place of those things, Elan will teach its students how to function in society. We have learned that the best way to make such a radical change is to provide the adolescent with the learning experiences that enable him or her to acquire the skills of social interaction and to maintain a psychodynamic program directed towards making sense of individual needs. Psychobabble, really. A twisting of words aimed at giving the layperson a false sense of professionalism. Nonetheless, Elan School notoriety was on the rise, and Ritchie was given wide liberties on how to administer the pioneer program. The people that should have been watching seemed to just turn a blind eye. The perceived benefit to society and the judicial system was apparent. There was finally a place that filled the gap of where to put problem kids, and, of course, the money. It is without a doubt that Ritchie lined more than a few politicians' pockets, and would even run for governor himself twice. He had built a reputation for himself as a powerful man, with alleged ties to some dangerous people. Most who could oppose Joe didn't, and he continued to steamroll forward. The federal government openly supported the school and its initiatives, a last chance for a teen to make change, and logistically, a way to free up beds in a quickly overflowing jail system. And thanks to Elan School, court-mandated last resort alternatives to jail time became commonplace. It's safe to assume that no one wanted to go to Elan. Whether or not attendance was a court order or a family decision, you could arrive to Elan in one of two ways, by choice or not. The new resident might be lucky enough to have a parent accompany them to the school, which was usually done with escort, a couple senior students. Typically, this would be the first time that either parent and child have seen the school. Likely, at first with a little amazement on the scenic drive-through main, until they arrived. Walking past the administration office, a small little portable that housed Richie and Davidson, you would take the long walk past all the residential houses to the main building.
Yeah, okay, yeah, October 18th, 1974, that was the day I arrived here at Elan 1, Poland Springs, Maine, which I thought was a boarding school, just a boarding school for education, and my parents thought it was just a boarding school for education and stuff like that, that I would learn to ride horses, ski-mobile, stuff like that regular kids do in high school and coming up, and instead of the inner city neighborhood that I grew up in. So my mother thought it was a good thing, and even though I was a juvenile offender at the time, she thought it was a good idea to spare me from juvenile prison to come here and possibly change my life, which was it didn't change my life for the positive. It was just a horrible, horrible stay here at this cult-like. All right, yeah. So, yeah, the first day with my father, just looking at this place now, it's like, wow, it's just a nightmare. As I'm walking through it, this is how we came in, and this is how we walked in. And we were told that was actually Joe Ritchie's office, whom you're going to learn a lot about over the course of time. And the main house is right here. And that's what we seen as we walked in. We parked over here somewhere and we had to walk to the house.
The routines at Elan did not stop for new students or tours, and the first exposure was typically shocking as child and parent alike realized what they had signed up for. For those few that resisted Elan and refused to go, their induction was far less forgiving. Usually arranged and coordinated with the parents, a few senior Elan students would arrive under the cover of darkness, snatching the rebel resident from their bed, with very little consideration for things like packing or proper goodbyes.
School is like a job in the house program. They come to school and they have things that have to get done every single day, and at the end of the week, they take a look at the job.
And I think by turning grades in every week and posting them in the house, the kids can see their upward progress, and then that's even more incentive for them to continue to do well.
The school's academic component was fully approved by the state of Maine, and Elan sold the program as a gateway to university, although it was more of a GED environment than anything. Students were assessed in each individual area of study and placed appropriately based on their results. Study itself was mostly self-directed. This wasn't a school with teachers on site full-time. They were more like tutors, handholders, and watchdogs. Richie had a unique view on how education should be administered, as an afterthought mostly. Classes were held at night between 7 and 11 p.m. Richie believed that sleep deprivation would make students easier to control.
The school in the evening is a big thing for us. The kids really enjoy school at night. It's such a natural progression for their day because they work on their feelings all day long. They work through their issues all day long. When school rolls around, they can really focus on the academic piece.
All day long, they deal with feelings, as you well know. In the house program, they deal with feelings from the time they get up in the morning until they finish dinner. dealing with feelings is very hard. It's not something they like doing, but it's something they truly need to do. When they come to school, we ask them to think. We don't ask them to feel. They know they can come and they can spend 4.5 hours thinking.
School wasn't how you graduated Elan anyways. Residents weren't there specifically for scholastic education. It was self-learning that was the focus. Graduation was a loose term, meant to signify the torturous climb through self-discovery and the hierarchy of the institution. Days at Elan were supposed to be about growth, facilitated through enduring hardship, both mental and physical. Structured purposely by Ritchie and Davidson to mimic the trials of the real world, a strict hierarchy and process-driven method would build the character and poise needed to operate as an adult, to be responsible for your actions, consciously and by choice. And every good action a student made would count towards earning rights, the slow loosening of restrictions that helps propel you through the ranks, a branching web of privileges that were never permanent and always changing. There was, at the most basic of levels, a division of only 2 social rankings. The strengths, which represented the veterans, the learned, who had also earned their dressed-up privilege, and the non-strengths, the greenhorns, the new and blind, who were forcibly estranged from even each other. Isolation was meant to bring independence and act as the foundation for everything that followed, including graduation. The graduation ladder aimed to represent each aspect of life in the real world, from the menial and mundane to positions of power. Elan hoped to expose its students to the cold reality of life while learning the skills needed to navigate. At the school, there were 5 levels of seniority, each with its own sub-hierarchy and department heads, very much like a working business would have. Only at Elan, the method was far more militant. Service dealt with things like janitorial duties and maintenance. This was the dirtiest of positions and where everyone starts. Here you would have no earned rights, no special privilege. Things like speaking when not spoken to or looking someone senior in the eyes were forbidden. Green, you were expected to grovel in the mud, just like everyone else before you. Kitchen was responsible for meal preparation, ordering stores, and culinary upkeep and cleaning. The roles are what you would imagine: dishwasher, prep, and cook. Kitchen was a more refined hierarchy, with each position having some sort of responsibility. Business was the first position of trust, meant to represent the step towards management through an understanding of administrative work and planning. Business would take care of all the paperwork, things like resident folders and intake forms, requisition orders and POs. Organization was key in this role, being able to adapt your vision to encompass the bigger picture from a different floor. Communications was the first position of real power. They had complete oversight of their house and were responsible for planning the day, who was doing what and where. They were the review board for things like mail and outside world news. They were the knockdown and punishment tribunal, the rule makers. Communications had been through it all. Long-term residents with graduation likely just around the corner. Last but not least are the expediters, the shingles, the house police. Expediters were meant to hold residents at Elan accountable. They were expected to be observant and critical, to find error where there wasn't any. No one was perfect, and it was their job to find out how. This role took a specific kind of person, usually someone with a mean streak, critical in all the wrong ways. The bullies. Elan policy was that a minimum of 7 promotions were required to be considered for graduation, although even that did not guarantee release. Statistically, most residents never progressed past the 5th promotion, getting knocked down and demoted, for posterity mostly. Knockdowns were commonplace and were supposed to teach the student the art of getting back up again. Resilience, the ability to deal with having everything taken from you. Knockdowns were a part of the program. Demotion and the stripping of rights was a routine thing, and to be expected. Being perfect wouldn't save you. In fact, that could be a reason for punishment as much as any other. And strangely, it was the students that were in charge of it all. There was only ever one adult for as many as 40 kids. Most of the time, they weren't even present, locked away in their private portable. Intervention with the students would be counterintuitive to the program. And amazingly, many of Elan's adult leaders were graduates of the school themselves. Broken teens who had been built back up right into Ritchie's own vision. These graduates understood the Elan program and were living proof, to Ritchie and Davidson at least, that the methods worked. These post-Elan teen graduates, now working as adult staff, had no formal training in any discipline like psychology, counseling, sociology, education, or any of the core staples of each profession. They only knew the cyclic trauma and the struggle they endured. However, they must have believed in the program to come back and continue its methods. Or it might have been the pay. The adults at Elan allegedly arrived in flashy clothes and BMWs.
How do we talk about our student being at Elan? How do we kind of broach the subject that our student went to a school that wasn't, well, it was kind of kids who had problems? And I say to them, look, have the student write about their experiences. Have the student write about what they were through before they came to Elan, what they went through while they were at Elan, and what their hopes and dreams are for the future. I find that college admissions offices love our kids, just for the reason you spoke about a minute ago. These kids have been through it. These kids have done all that stuff. They don't need to do it again. When our kids go on to college, they're serious. They're going to college because they want an education. They aren't going to college.
The Elan program, both the residential component and the academic component, works really well for kids that come in with any kind of specific learning disability.
Most of the students who enter Elan come in here with a credit deficit. Even though they may tell you they're a junior, that means that they've sat in the school or at least were enrolled in the school for 3 years. They may only have 2 or 3 credits to their name. And one of the things we need to do is we need to help them catch up, make up for some of that lost time, so that when they finish this program, hopefully they can go on to college.
The house rules at Elan were a growing list of vague punishable infractions that were all about control. Designed in part by Ritchie and Davidson to continue the stripping of identity from the attending teens, Elan operated very much like a jail in many aspects. Every action was prescribed. There was strict routine and perpetual expectation. Contact with friends and relatives was extremely limited, and residents were rarely allowed outside. Even PT was only held once a week and limited to only an hour. Although, if a house performed good in the eyes of the communications and staff, sometimes the students were free to roam the property for a couple of hours on the weekend. Oversleeping, undersleeping, pretending to sleep, looking out windows, smiling too much, perceived facial reactions to orders, being nice to someone. The rules were vague at best and were mostly the erratic and short-sighted decisions of the kids themselves. And every student, regardless of how perfect they might be, was expected to be knocked down as a part of their passage, and multiple times. Real life wasn't fair, and every man, woman, and child will face adversity as routine throughout their entire lives. It's how they dealt with it, the lessons they took from it, that builds character. A fair sentiment, although certainly askew when taken in context with Elan's fierce method. Immediately upon arrival, the trials would begin. Each new resident, either wide-eyed and scared, or head-high and proud, would immediately learn their place as a non-strength. Non-strengths were exactly as the name implies. New or even old residents with no earned privileges or rights. This was the starting line, the lowest of the low. And they were meant to know that from the second they arrived. Strengths, everyone else at the school, were not permitted to speak to non-strengths, and most of them didn't want to. They had earned their rights, and now it was time for them. Orientation for new students was typically short. A quick tour, here's your house and bed, some introduction, and then a general meeting.
You know what? I'm sick and tired of your garbage around here. You know what? I gotta deal with your skank.
General meetings were the Elan School version of the attack therapy developed at Daytop Village. However, the post-session therapies that Casriel insisted upon for the method to be effective were absent from the treatments at Elan. This was largely in part to the school being run by its students. There were simply not enough adult staff or trained professionals per student to do anything more than be a superficial presence. In a general meeting, students were instructed to get their feelings out, to unleash their anger, their frustration, to bundle up all that unspent aggression and turn it loose on the target, the poor student being knocked down. General meetings were usually held in the main house mess hall, which could seat the entire school. The students would sit facing the back wall whereupon the target of the general meeting stood. Usually, the victim would wear the chains of their infraction. Perhaps they complained too much and were forced to wear diapers and a bib. Maybe they were thought to be promiscuous, breaking the no-contact law at Elan. They might be dressed in revealing clothing, face smeared with makeup. Perhaps they were scared and crying for help, and as such were forced to wear a billboard citing their weakness and fears in the most humiliating of ways. And then came the group therapy, the attacks. The intention was accountability, meant to expose hard truths, abruptly and without inhibition. Although these troubled teens, already facing the throes of natural teenage angst, only then just learning how to communicate as an adult and in a school prison, had more anger to give than anything constructive, and general meetings came to serve a dual purpose. The punished, the knocked down, the victim standing at the head of the crowd, paid penance for their crime in the form of the verbal attacks, however inaccurate or misguided they might be, and the attackers were able to vent their aggression. This was their opportunity to rage, and all of it was encouraged by the senior staff. Ritchie believed this method was foolproof. He believed that it held people accountable for their actions. General meetings forced them to confess and face the consequences. He gambled that the severity of the punishments and hard grind back into strength category would be enough that the student would learn not to do that again. Cause and very hard effect. Some students, very few, responded positively to the breaking of their will and personality, although it's safe to assume that most did not. While the Elan method of treatment was controversial and fringe at best, there is some official merit to the process. The concept, at least, makes a little sense, in theory. However, it's prominent to note that attack therapy, or general meetings, was never intended to be used or work on patients who are suffering from conditions like trauma, depression, or trust issues, to which most, if not all, Elan residents suffered from.
Why is it so much fun for you to be miserable? And what do you get out of it?
In the Elan system of relentless emotional pressure, the ultimate tool is the general meeting. Prompted by staff members, the entire household confronts a single resident. The purpose is to force her to reveal her deepest feelings about herself.
You just better start being honest with us, man, because everyone here's getting pretty hostile.
I get hostile. So I look at you as an ingrate. I look at you as a brat. I look at you as a spoiled brat.
You have nothing inside you. Just a selfish little spoiled leech is what you are. If you think people, are going to, give you and get you in this, you're out of your mind. You know what I mean?
Mike Skako was born on September 19, 1960, and is the third youngest of 7 children, raised in an affluent Belhaven neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut. The Skakos were not poor. Father Rushton was brother to a Kennedy and made a fortune as the head of a very large and successful private company. 7 children is no small number, and while likely hard to handle, parents Rushton and Anna raised their children with strong American values. Work hard and live the dream. Do right and freedom is yours. and their traditional mentality certainly had an effect on the children. They were apt, respectful, and each of them played their family role, for the most part. However, in 1973, Mother Anna would pass away after a short battle with brain cancer, and this would have negative repercussions with some of the children. Now, with Anna gone, so was the strong matriarch, the constant attention and motherly love, the soft guiding hand and iron fist. Mike would perhaps feel this loss the most, and this would mark the beginning of his downward spiral, quickly turning to the rebel life. Truancy, smoking pot, and drinking alcohol, recreation quickly became routine. Want became a need, and Mike would fall victim to teenage alcoholism. It's October 30th, 1975, and the neighborhood teens in Belhaven have planned to meet for the annual rite of passage, Mischief Night, playing Nicky Nine-Door or toilet papering houses. Of course, alcohol would be involved. Mischief Night was more about the party than the pranks. Halloween was for the children. The night was for the teens. It's around 8 p.m. and Mike is hanging out in his driveway, sitting in his father's Lincoln, listening to music with a few friends, and Martha Moxley. Martha had moved next door to the Skakels a year prior from a California suburb. She was friendly and extroverted, good-looking, and with a smile that was as charming as the way she held herself. She was an easily likable girl. Mike and Martha were friends only, although perhaps Mike had been pining for just a little more, guided by lust as much as confused teenage love. But Martha simply wasn't interested. They were in the front seat together, with friends in the back, when around 8:45, Thomas joins them, sliding into the front seat next to Martha. Thomas was 2 years older than Martha at 17, and like most older kids do, he carried his age like a badge, confident and with a nonchalant poise. And of course, most girls were infatuated with this bad boy image. Tom, like Mike, had shown specific interest in Martha, although Tom was much more forward with his advances. Martha had shot him down more than once, and perhaps a little too nicely. She wasn't the type who liked to disappoint anyone, and teenage naivete and the desire to be accepted prevailed. The group eventually decides to make the drive to North Greenwich and meet up with some friends there, and everyone leaves, but Thomas and Martha stayed behind. The two stumbled to the fence that divided their properties and clumsily started to make out. A witness would later recall seeing them there around 9:45. Around the same time, the dogs in the neighborhood started unexplainably barking and howling, not stopping until around 10:30. The next day, Martha's body was found under a tree on her family's yard. Her pants were pulled down and her clothing in array, and pieces of a bloody and broken 6-iron were laying nearby. Martha had been viciously beaten and stabbed, although the broken shaft of the 6-iron used in the assault was never found. The grass from the start of her driveway to the tree where she was found had been flattened where her body had been dragged, haphazardly and in a zigzag pattern. Belhaven was in complete shock. Everyone in the neighborhood was interviewed, statements were taken, and evidence was collected. And outside one particularly strange, older adult neighbor, it was Mike and Thomas, the last two people to be seen with Martha, that authorities focused the majority of their attentions on. Their father, Rushton, was initially uncooperative with police and forbid his children from speaking to them. But he eventually turned a new leaf and even invited detectives to use the Skakel residence as an investigation headquarters, which police graciously accepted. A thorough investigation into the Skakels was still conducted. Their pool was drained and combed through. The garbage was regularly picked through. Hair samples were taken, and everyone agreed to a polygraph, which they all passed. The only inconsistencies were with Thomas and Mike. Thomas was the last person to be seen with Martha, making out with her at the fence, right up until when the coroner estimated the time of her death. Both Thomas and Mike were unusually guarded in their statements, and their stories would change and evolve as they were pressured for clarity. Eventually, Mike would admit to police how he might have had an infatuation with Martha, how he would climb the tree by her window and watch her as she changed. This was a regular thing, and Mike admitted to interrogators that on October 29th, the night before Martha's murder, he was in the tree, watching her, and he thinks he might have been seen. Multiple motives had been established, and evidence pointed heavily towards at least one of the two Skakel brothers. With nothing more than circumstantial, however, the murder of Martha Moxley went cold. It's 1978, and a 17-year-old Mike Skakel is now battling with full-time addiction to alcohol. Wild and out of control, this would come to a point when he was arrested for drunk driving in New York State. Rather than have a permanent record, and very much against Mike's will, Rushton chose to send Mike to Elan. Mike's brother Thomas had been sent there a few years before him, so Mike thought he knew what to expect. And he arrived with bravado. With his head high, Mike might have thought his street cred and misguided confidence would help him establish status and fit in. He was ambivalent and dismissive of his environment, talking openly about his social status, how he was much more than a petulant rich kid. He was somebody. He had paid his dues and didn't need to be told by anyone. He was better than that. Mike was quickly knocked down and put in his place, but not before allegedly boasting to another resident that he had murdered someone with a golf club and gotten away with it. A general meeting was called right away. Murder was a serious claim, and if true, those demons needed to be vocalized, released into the world so Mike could heal. Mike's general meeting was relentless. For days, the house hammered Mike, asking him over and over again if Mike actually did murder Martha. He would deny it at first, but as the general meeting went from hours to days, Mike would eventually submit, changing his answer from no to I don't know, and finally, yes. Confession made, the house moved on, and no one spoke of this again. Mike would attempt to escape twice during his 2 years at Elan, but was quickly caught and brought back both times. He would go on to graduate the Elan program and, post-reform, make something of himself. He would involve himself heavily in helping those around him dealing with addiction. It was something he was incredibly passionate about. Having been there, he knew a unique perspective on the trials of substance abuse and became a pillar of hope and beacon of light for many.
We also use spanking, which is symbolic. Again, it's a last resort, okay? And it's one resident spanking another resident, and it's done with a ping pong paddle, okay? And usually a person won't get spanked more than once or twice, but it's a symbolic thing, which is if you're going to act like a baby, you should be treated like a baby.
How many people spank you?
Well, it depends. Usually when they use a paddle, they may have 4 or 5 people spank a person like 3 to 5 times each.
One resident spanking another resident. Usually a person won't get spanked more than once or twice.
Well, when they spanked me, I mean, they didn't have to spank me, so I turned black and blue. Simple as that. I mean, that was just one time after another. I was so sore I couldn't sit down. Now, to me, that's a little ridiculous.
How often were you spanked?
Every day for a long time.
Hard?
Oh, yeah. Clipboards.
Done with a ping pong paddle.
Hands. Anything, you know. Something that they could, well, I would feel it, supposedly. They thought it would, I needed it because I supposedly was a terribly big baby.
I mean, it doesn't, we're a equal rights facility.
General meetings were the only static treatment, although, like attack therapy, the other methods of penance were wide and varied, and rarely had any relevance to the infraction. It was the senior students at Elan that chose the methods of punishment, communications and expediters, most of them last resort teens, many with violent histories. None of the punishments were based within anything therapeutic or constructive, and lacked real-life experience and wisdom. The teens only reference a reinforcement of the trauma that they themselves went through. The word bully was dressed up with fancy nomenclature like expediters and shingles. And the mentality was simple. Why would anyone repeat an offense if the result was so horrific and humiliating? One might wonder why this institution-administered abuse never made headlines, but the fact is, it did. Elan was an industry, and a profitable one at that, led by a powerful and influential multimillionaire. The school was able to skirt most major headlines, and whatever bad press did make it through was quickly spun into something positive, and eventually into oblivion. Elan School's strict visitation policies helped obscure the abuse even further. Phone calls to family were restricted to once a week with a maximum of 15 minutes, if calls were allowed at all. And all calls were monitored. If anything negative was spoken about Elan, the call would immediately be disconnected, and the resident would move straight into a general meeting, and then an appropriate knockdown. Letters were the accepted method of correspondence between resident and home, and even these written words were easily policed. Staff often forced residents to write praise about the school and advancements they've made because of it. Worried parents wondering about their wayward child rarely knew anything different. Despite strict policing of sexual contact, so extreme that even suspicion was enough for reprimand, teenage love and curiosity was inevitable, and there were multiple incidents. Teens will be teens, and they were all at the age where sexual expression and experimentation was part and parcel to the onslaught of hormones. This was a time when teens naturally quested for love and heartbreak, where they could find and define themselves. Teens need these chaotic, crazy days where lust and the desire to be wanted gets confused with love. And so, contact was going to happen. And when it did, repercussion was often diabolical. One young teen girl at Elan was singled out with her friend under suspicion of sexually related infractions. As a punishment, they were forced into a closet with 2 boys, both of them last resort residents convicted for sexual offenses. They were known and admitted rapists. The closet door was locked, and the boys were told to do what they wanted with the young women. The girls were not allowed to leave the room for days, and a number of boys came and went as they pleased. Richie himself did not escape scrutiny and charge. At Elan, there were multiple allegations against Richie spanning across his entire career, although those accusations were quickly recanted by the students, likely influenced by Richie and his position of power. The victims were silenced, disregarded, and knocked down. At Scarborough Downs, Richie's racetrack, more than once he had been accused and charged for sexual assault-related offenses by his own employees. Richie was a volatile owner, erratic in his decisions and tyrannical in his rule. Employees were terrified of him. No one felt safe, constantly on eggshells and working in fear of losing their job for just about any reason. Staff kind of just kept their heads down and eyes forward. In total, 3 Scarborough Downs employees came forward with charges against Richie. He would settle 2 of the cases outside of court and lost the other. Escape attempts at Elan were inevitable, and the school countered this with strict oversight into a resident's every move. Even at night they were watched, looked in upon every 10 to 15 minutes. The night guard would lift covers to make sure a student wasn't dressed for escape, or perhaps in nothing, dressed to meet with another student. Despite the tight and strictly policed routine upheld by Elan residents, many students attempted escape. Some would only make it a few miles, others all the way home. All of them would eventually return to the lab. Some came back by choice, but most were collected. Much like induction, senior residents would immediately be dispatched when a runaway's location was known, ordered to collect them, with great liberties on how. And when caught, returning residents were knocked down to the lowest levels, and punishment was usually fierce and long-lasting, progressive with severity, but almost always, escape would earn you a spot in the ring.
Give light to those that live in
Why did they put you in chains and in a rabbit suit?
Because I ran away. When they put them on me, they told me, that they were going to be on me, until I left. But, it's been 2 weeks so far.
What does it do? Okay, it humiliates him and it restricts his movement. He's run away from here 4 times, okay? He's run away from every place he's been before at least 17 or 18 times.
I won't run away again. I told them that. I told them I won't run away again, but if they were going to put me in jail, they put me in jail. If they wouldn't, they'd have to make me walk around with shackles on.
This boy's been in and out of juvenile detention centers for years and faced charges of breaking and entering and assault. For him, it was either Elan or jail.
The kid has no idea what prison is like. Somebody has got to introduce to him some realistic concepts of what's ahead of him, and he's gonna hit jail if he doesn't change. What's gonna happen to him? He's 5'6", he's got bright orange hair and blue eyes. How long is he gonna last in jail?
I'm not a dog, I'm not even a person anymore, This is supposed to be America, I still have rights as a human being to walk around. I can't even do that with these things on.
Those things stay on him. He decides how long they stay on him, not me. He makes that decision. If he came up to his director tomorrow and said, I want to get back involved, I want to change, okay? I want to participate, I want to try again, they would come off like that, okay? If he wants to act like a criminal, he'll be treated like a criminal. It's that basic.
Joe, you make no bones about it. There is corporal punishment here at Elan. Tell us about it. What are the stages it comes in? Who's it administered by?
Well, it's administered by the kids. First of all, corporal. It's a harsh term. Okay, what it is we have the ring. Okay, which everybody misinterprets. It's not a boxing ring. It's a ring of human people.
Youngsters who are accused of being bullies are forced to fight continuously against a series of opponents until they are beaten.
The bully is introduced as what he is. In this corner is the bully who's trying to turn this facility into a detention center. Okay, and in this corner is the house champion who's going to show him why it can't be done. And that's exactly how it does. And we never allow the bully to win.
But girls get put in the ring too.
Well, girls bully as well as boys do. I mean, it doesn't, we're a equal rights facility.
In my early days at Elan, I split. I left the program and I went to Boston. I stayed in Boston approximately 2 days and I returned to the program where I encountered a semi-professional boxer in what they call the boxing ring. It was more than just the boxing ring. It was sort of, you could say, a kill situation where I stood no chance even in defending myself. And it was too much. It was definitely too much.
You were badly beaten?
Yes.
The ring could be called at any time and for anyone. No one was exempt, and this punishment was reserved for the most heinous of infractions. Ritchie proposed that the ring was an exercise in futility. He hoped to demonstrate that violence is never the answer, that it will get you nowhere, because there will always be someone else to knock you down. like jail or death. The ring itself was no ring at all. Rather, it was a circle of residents, all whipped into a violent frenzy. In the center of the circle would stand the accused, the knocked down, and the first of their opponents. Wearing minimal headgear and with no adult or medical oversight, the victim would face a gauntlet of opponents, forced to fight until they had nothing left, and oftentimes more. If they fell down, they would be picked up. If they tried to escape, they would be pushed back in. The onslaught continued until the house elders said. Sometimes, the ring would last for just a few rounds, although this wasn't standard, and some sessions could continue over the course of a few days, or even weeks. It's safe to assume that at least some of the residents did not ever hold back, and perhaps a few even wished for it. Elan housed the troubled and unpredictable, the last resorts, many of them violent offenders who learned fist over famine. It should be obvious that this kind of therapy had no positive effect for any of the residents, that it only reinforced trauma and trauma-based action. The angry get to feed their anger, and the weak are reminded of their position. The ring would become a staple of Elan reprimand.
Well, what I was saying was that we're upfront about it, the boxing ring, the spanking, that we're into containment, controlling, and justice. We're not into degradation. The idea is not to punish. All right? The idea is to make sure we have an orderly society, a society where people don't get abused.
Phil Williams was born straight into adversity, followed by his sister Pam 3 years later. It was a broken home right from the beginning, and his parents split very early on. When Phil was only 9, his mother nearly died from a vicious attack from a steel pipe. Her injuries were immense, and she never recovered. She remained catatonic and was cared for in a nursing home until she died 28 years later. Phil's father was arrested and charged in relation to the attack. He was definitively involved, and it was likely he wielded the pipe, but he was only convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. Parentless, Phil and his younger sister were now suddenly wards of the state and were moved from their home in Auburn to a foster home in Rockland, Maine. Here, Phil would bounce between a charming and good-looking boy to a tyrant with a temper. Undeniably troubled, largely in part to his tumultuous childhood, Phil also suffered from intense migraines, and the worst of his angry episodes seemed to correlate with the onset of these headaches. His foster home was loving and attentive, and they tried very hard to reach Phil, but nothing seemed to work, and more progressive treatment was deemed necessary. First, he was sent to Maine Youth Center, and with limited success. In 1982, he moved on to Elan. Phil seemed to respond to this change in environment. At least he was less defiant, and his naturally fun, charming, and witty personality began to shine. His migraines would continue, however, and he complained of them often. So often that senior Elan residents and staff thought he was trying to manipulate the system, using the headaches to get out of schoolwork and house chores. They ordered Phil into the ring. With the circle formed and Phil suited up, he would face 3 or 4 opponents, weekly. Phil was small for his age, and maybe a little scrappy with a strong spirit, but he was definitely not a fighter, and did little to protect himself. He would fall to the ground a number of times before staff felt he had had enough. They picked him up off the ground and dragged him to their office. There, behind closed doors, Phil would continue to complain of his headache. This fell on deaf ears until Phil eventually collapsed to the floor in a fit of convulsions. Staff did not know how to respond and kind of just watched Phil as he started to turn blue. A school resident, charged with guarding the office door, heard the commotion and peeked inside, raising alarms immediately upon seeing a blue and convulsing Phil. Eventually, staff would submit and loaded Phil into a car and drove him to St. Mary's Hospital in nearby Lewiston, where he would immediately be taken into intensive care. Philip Williams would be pronounced dead the next day. The coroner would determine that Phil died from natural causes, a brain aneurysm. The ring, and Phil's part in it, were never mentioned outside of the school.
It's interesting to watch the changes they go through academically here. They come in here not liking school. School was only a place for them to go to socialize. School was a place to go and meet their friends. Classes were not important. Grades were not important. They had no idea of going on to school. Thought that school was a dead end. They leave Elan, they're looking forward to more education. They're looking forward to entering college. They're looking forward to a number of opportunities and options in life. When they come here, they have no opportunity, they have no option. They leave here with a wide variety of options on their plate. It is absolutely amazing to me every day. I come to work every day and I'm amazed by what happens to the kids here. It's truly a phenomenal experience.
Years pass and the Elan School controversy over allegations of abuse continued. But that doesn't stop the influx of like-minded institutions popping up everywhere across America. Hyde School, Provo Canyon, CEDU, and many, many more all base their treatment methods on adaptations of the Elan program. Modified perhaps, but still based in structural automation and equally as vicious and traumatizing isolation therapies. The troubled teen industry is booming. It's 1991 and William Kennedy Smith was tried and later acquitted for rape. During the investigation, a rumor surfaced that William was at Mike Skakel's house on the night of Martha Moxley's murder. This was later proven to be false, but all the attention brought new life to the old case, and it was reopened. January 9th, 2000, 9 years after the case reopened and 25 years after Martha's murder, an arrest warrant is finally issued. Mike Skakel would voluntarily surrender to police. Prosecution would highlight Mike's inconsistent statements given to police, alongside damning audio tapes found in the cold case investigation, in which Mike is heard speaking about Martha. Multiple witness testimonies where Mike was allegedly boasting about Martha's murder, and his own alleged admission of the crime during a general meeting at Elan School. On June 7, 2002, Mike Skakel would be found guilty of the murder of Martha Moxley and sentenced to 20 years to life. Mike would maintain his innocence throughout the entire trial, and post-conviction, immediately appealed the decision. 11 years later, in 2013, the Supreme Court would vacate Mike's murder conviction and order a new trial, citing that Mike had inadequate legal counsel at the time. The new trial would never happen, and on October 30th, 2020, a Supreme Court judge announced that they would not retry Michael for Martha's murder. January 29, 2001, and Joseph Ritchie passes away after a short battle with cancer at age 54. He was survived by his mother and 2 sons from his first marriage, and Joe's second wife, Sharon Terry, takes control of Joe's estate, which was estimated at over $14 million. Sharon also took on all Joe's debt. In his later years, Joe became careless and lackadaisical about money, owing an excess of $1 million in unpaid alimony to his first wife, countless thousands in back taxes, and a myriad of other undisclosed debts. Sharon would also take control of Elan. She believed in the concept behind the controversial school. She would attempt to make big changes, promptly removing methods like the general meeting, although this would not stop the controversy surrounding the school. Things like social media and the internet have yet to take hold, but open source info is on the rise, and the silent have found their voice deep in the annals of the internet, and with it, each other. By the late 2000s, the internet had become a household amenity, and that bridged the gap even further. Now, Elan School alumni have a place to meet, and their tiny voice grew to a resounding growl, and the general public was suddenly listening. A small splash at first, stories from Elan's alum would force the school's controversies to the forefront, and Sharon was ill-equipped to navigate the chaos. Enrollment would suffer year after year, and ultimately, under the weight of waning tuitions and imminent structural repairs, Elan would announce its closure on March 23rd of 2011. Its doors officially closing a week later on April 1st. It's 2016, and Maine State Police suddenly reopen a cold case investigation into the death of Phil Williams, who died on December 27, 1982 from a brain aneurysm. Initially, there were no charges filed as a result of the investigation, citing insufficient evidence. Much like the Martha Moxley-Mike Skakel case only a handful of years prior, Phil's death was put back into question after Elan School alumni Mark Babbitt began his quest to bring a civil action suit against the state of Maine on behalf of the former students and residents of Elan.
On the death certificate for Phil Williams Jr., the cause reads probably a ruptured aneurysm. It was 1982. The 15-year-old was living at Poland's Elan School for troubled teens. And for 33 years, his sister Pam Newell never thought to question a thing.
I didn't know that these stories were out there, but they've been out there for years.
It wasn't until 3 weeks ago Newell was contacted by a former student working on a documentary who had names and phone numbers of witnesses. They told her Williams was accused by staff of faking headaches, and they said in the hours before her brother's death, he had been punished in what they describe as a boxing ring.
Not a boxing ring, like a boxing ring, a ring of children where he proceeded to get beat. 20 minutes or so, they called the ambulance, they took Phil, and they never saw him again.
The Elan School closed for good back in 2011, and before that, the school had received a lot of criticism for its controversial therapies, one of which many students say was forced fighting.
I want people to take responsibility for what they did, and I don't care that they didn't throw the punches. They were adults. Adults are supposed to take care of children.
Newell's journey now is to find answers, and she's hoping state police can help her uncover what really went on that day at the now closed Elan School.
I thought it was a wonderful place. I thought they were helping my brother. I thought he was coming home. He came home all right, in a box.
Sadly, Phil's case was dismissed as there was insufficient evidence to bring about charges. Babbitt, however, has gone on record saying that Elan Survivors Incorporated is by far not done with Phil Williams. Babbitt, to this day, continues to be a beacon of hope for people affected by the troubled teen industry.
One of the things that parents worry about when kids start applying to college and start writing their college essays is, well, how do we talk about our student being in Elan? How do we kind of broach the subject that our student went to a school that wasn't, well, it was kind of kids who had problems. And I say to them, look, have the student write about their experiences. Have the student write about what they were through before they came to Elan, what they went through while they were at Elan, and what their hopes and dreams are for the future. I find that college admissions offices love our kids, just for the reason you spoke about a minute ago. These kids have been through it. These kids have done all that stuff. They don't need to do it again. When our kids go into college, they're serious. They're going to college because they want an education. They aren't going to college to party.
I graduated high school a year earlier. I'm only 17. I'm going off to college next week. For the first year I leave Elan, I'm going to be going to a community college, get myself situated, take some classes, and then about a year later I'm going to transfer to the university of my choice. I'm not sure yet where I want to go, but eventually I want to be a lawyer.
I most definitely want to go to college. I don't think I would have said that before I came here. I was a high school dropout. I thought I was going to get my GED and like go to community college or something, and but I definitely want to go to college. I want to major in criminology. It's
interesting to watch the changes they go through academically here. They come in here not liking school. School was only a place for them to go to socialize. School was a place to go and meet their friends. Classes were not important. Grades were not important. They had no idea of going on to school. Thought that school was a dead end. They leave Elan, they're looking forward to more education. They're looking forward to entering college. They're looking forward to a number of opportunities and options in life. When they come here, they have no opportunity, they have no option. They leave here with a wide variety of options on their plate. It is absolutely amazing to me every day. I come to work every day and I'm amazed by what happens to the kids here. It's truly a phenomenal experience.
Yeah.
Thank you once again for watching or listening. While I tried my very best to give as complete an overview of Elan and its history, I realized that I truly only touched the tip of the iceberg. Researching this series brought me to many dark corners of the internet, where I read countless stories of reform school survivors, not only from Elan, but from the many clone institutions that exist around the world. For this episode, among many other references listed in the descriptions box, I pulled from many great resources, like Children of Darkness, The Last Stop, YouTube channels from Elan survivors like Mark Babbitts, and other harrowing stories of experience written in often poetic and unique ways, such as the horrific and all-at-once inspiring webcomic, Joe vs. Elan. Elan School and the business of the troubled teen industry is a very dark rabbit hole, and my heart goes out to the survivors. I hope I've walked a fair line with part 2 of this docuseries. I have a Patreon, home to my beloved patrons, my producers. On my Patreon, for about the cost of a cup of coffee a month, you gain access to supplemental materials for each episode when available, the uncensored footage and photographs when possible, and can contact me directly. I will respond. I admit I've been slacking a bit, not just with the channel, but with my Patreon. Real life has become very demanding, and it can be tough balancing this, my passion project, and the things that sustain me. My producers, my patrons, I promise I will try to give you more. John Rotman, Nephilim 2038, Lindsay Brandon 3142. Thank you. Liking the episode, commenting, and of course subscribing all help the channel in enormous ways. YouTube and its strange algorithms favor these 3 metrics and help to push the episode and channel higher on the search ladder. Thank you. Reckless Ben is a channel that I came across a few months ago while researching this trilogy. I was immediately captivated by his unique style of investigative journalism. Sharp and precise, each episode is relayed with the comedic charm of the titular host. His most recent series is a hard-hitting expose on the famed McCamey Manor. The extents to which Reckless Ben and his team of fellow YouTubers go to expose the manor is incredible, and the outcome is probably not what you think. A Landslide Part 3 is currently in production, although I have some big things I'm hoping to accomplish for this final installment of the trilogy, and much of that is out of my direct control. If necessary, I have another episode in the pipeline ready to start, but I'm hoping that the stars align and I'm able to execute the final chapter as I envision. Until next time, thank you once again for joining me for this, Season 4, Episode 3 of Something Criminal.
The name of the place is Elan.
All my friends have up and gone. Most of them have fallen in love. They're getting married too young.
You had me under your thumb. But you didn't do anything right. You had me totally in your control. For what purpose? To stroke your own ego? What were you doing with me? How? Why did you do this to me? Why did you break me? Why did you do any of this to me? I was in pain, physical pain before I met you, but at least my emotional pain was under control. And now I have nothing. I have absolutely nothing. I'm banned from North Shore. I'm banned from NCH. I have no PCP. I have no pain specialist. I have no neurologist. I have nothing. And I'm in so much fucking pain. I can't even hug my kids anymore. All for what? Talk about it much, but I haven't given up against others' opinions. Why couldn't you just say no to me that one time? Why couldn't you just stand up? Walk out. I didn't understand it. None of it matters. There's nobody who could please me when I'm all caught up. None of it matters anymore. Trying to love someone. I mean, he don't love me, because if you're seeing this, I'm already gone. And I let myself go cold, and I'm tired of being told I keep too quiet, I am too stubborn, I should be more self-assured, but I've seen too much to think simply. Felt too much pain to find beauty in things. If only I ever tried to keep on reminding myself that these days they'll all pass away. These days they'll all pass away. And it's sickening how I cannot wait.
and it's sickening how I cannot wait.